Hello, welcome back to my homemade tent project. As you can see, I've had to relocate it to the polytunnel. I left it for about 2-3 days in the carpool and not much happened. I put it in here and it finally started to cure. It had to stay here for 6 days, I think, before I could put a second coat on it, which I've done now, and it's been another week and it's finally handleable. So that's quite good going, I think, for oilcloth. Some of the accounts I've read and some of the videos I've seen of other people doing it, it was months before they could handle it and it had all properly cured. All depends on the time of year, of course, and your ambient temperature. So the second coat went on really nicely. As anticipated, it used a lot less material, a lot less of the waterproofing stuff. So it was about 8 litres first time around and probably a third of that the second time around. After the second coat, it's really taken on a nice colour. It's more consistent and it's much more the colour that I had in mind. So that's good. What we'll do then is take this down and go and pitch it and then compare it to 2 other tents that I've got and a tarp, a camping tarp. First though, I'm going to bundle this up and weigh it because I'm very curious to see how much it weighs. Now remember, the design of this was from a whole series of articles called Light Pack Camping, and it's supposed to be a lightweight tent for one Boy Scout. I'm supposed to be going on a hike with this. Well, we'll see in a moment, but yes, it feels heavy. Well, there we go, bang on 5.5 kilos. There's nothing else on there. That really is how much it weighs. 5.5 kilos. 14 pounds. Bear in mind that's 5.5 kilos without any ropes, pegs or the poles. Cripes. In a moment I'm going to have a go at putting this up for the first time. First though, I'll introduce you to what we're going to compare it to. This is a Polish Lavvu, I think it's often called. It's basically 2 Polish Army ponchos buttoned together. This tent here is also 2 army ponchos, but in a completely sort of different configuration, but we'll get to that in a moment. This one, as you can see, is like a teepee or a wigwam, or a Lavvu, which is the Finnish, I think it is, Finnish traditional tent, normally made out of hides rather than ponchos. In the middle here is a single pole that's made up of 6 sections, and the idea would have been that each soldier has 3 small sections of pole, a handful of pegs, and of course his poncho, and then they just pair up and voila, they've got an instant tent. This is a really great little tent. I really like this for things like festivals because it's dark and it's canvas, which means that in the morning when you want to lie in, which is often the case at festivals if you've had a jolly good evening the night before, you can do in here because it takes hours to heat up, whereas everybody else in their nylon tents is actually cooking as soon as the sun comes up. So this tent is roughly 7 foot in diameter. If I get in it a moment, you can see for one person there is acres of room in here. It's really great. For 2 people, which is what it's designed for, it's pretty cosy. To close this up, you've got the option of buttoning it up there. It's buttoned on the other side, but I normally just stick an extra peg in there and you're done. I've been through some proper heavy rain in this tent and even snow and it's held up brilliantly. Because it's got no flat sides to it, it doesn't catch the wind. It's also got no guy ropes, which is both a plus and a minus. It's a plus because it makes it easier and quicker to put up. It's a minus because I found that when there's lots of tents around, instead of tripping over your guy ropes, people just trip over the actual tent. And I've had that happen when I've actually been in it as well. These little tents became really popular for a time, and I was lucky enough to get this one before that happened and the prices went up. People have done all kinds of modifications with these to make them, well, a bit more substantial. The most popular, I think, would probably be putting a skirt on it. So if you put a skirt on and raise it up somewhat, you've got a little bell tent. Of course, by then you've got something that's fairly weighty to begin with, becomes something that you're not going to backpack with. This is something I would take motorbike camping. It's great for that application, and it's great for, I've even put this up in pouring rain without getting outside of it. You can just flip it over you, pole up, pegs down. you can't do that with a normal tent. We'll look at this one next, and you can tell by the flecktarn camouflage on here, this is a German tent. Now this is a German version of the US Army pup tent, I think it's called. The small tent that was used a great deal in the Second World War. It's also simply two ponchos buttoned together, but as you can tell, it's a completely different configuration. This is much more of a traditional, I was going to say A-frame shape, but it has no ridge pole in it. It's just got a little pole at each end, and then you just pull it tight. Now this is what I often take when I'm hiking, but I don't take the whole thing, I just take half of it. This is actually the first time I've ever put it together as an actual tent. What I normally do is just peg down one side, and then I have one corner up on a hiking pole and the other corner pinned down, and that's just enough of a shelter. If the weather really comes in, you can just drop the hiking pole and basically turn it into a bivvy. As a tent, it feels like there's less room than that one, even though you'd think it would be very similar. It's basically 6 foot long on the wall, and then you've got a tiny little porch area at each end. These are not the actual poles that are supposed to come with this. These were the ones that were supplied with it, but these are just cheapo reproduction ones, and I suspect they're sitting slightly higher than they should be. So if this was down a few inches, you'd have a little bit more spread to it, which I reckon is probably the way to go. But like I say, I don't normally use this as a tent, I use this as a tarp. The alternative tarp that I've got is the one we'll come to next, which is the British Army Basha. Whereas the other two are relics of the Cold War, this I believe is still current issue. This weighs nothing compared to those two, but of course this is synthetic, whereas in their canvas, which to me is an advantage because I like the breathability of the canvas, and I like the fact that the canvas will stop the sun and it doesn't cook you. There's lots of advantage to canvas. Obviously there's the massive downside of it being much heavier, and when it gets properly saturated it's even heavier again because it's obviously full of water. That doesn't happen with this. Early versions of these Bashas were PU nylon, so just nylon that's been coated. This is nylon, which I believe is nylon that's impregnated with silicone. It has a sort of slippery feel to it. It's very hard to fold up, for instance. You tend to just scrunch it together. But on the other hand, it's really light, and it's also really strong, well, for what it is. Downside, of course, is that when this is in direct sunlight, it gets quite clammy inside. Now, of course, being a tarp, there's a whole load of different configurations you can put this up in. This just happens to be my favourite. This is my go-to setup for it. This is just a hiking pole here on near the corner on one edge. So then I can sit in it like this. I'm fairly out of the weather. If it starts raining really heavily, I can just retreat back there. I've got absolutely loads of room. This being the normal configuration that I use the Basha in, you can see when I saw this picture, there's a sort of hint of similarity about it, and that's one of the reasons I was inspired to have a go at making this tent. So in many ways, this tarp, this Basha, is ideal for hiking and for wild camping, I think. It's just very versatile. And lots of people pitch this by just making like a clothesline between two trees and flipping it over that. You can use this over a hammock, for instance. It's got, like I say, loads of configurations. So it's very versatile. It's also very waterproof and it's very light. I think, I've obviously immediately forgotten the numbers, but I think this is about 5 times lighter than the one I've just made. Even the heaviest option here, which is the Polish one, the Polish tiny tent, that's half the weight of the one that I've just made. But then again, perhaps the one I've just made is utterly awesome in some other regard. This is the entirety of the putting up instructions, is this tiny little diagram here. There's almost no indication here about ropes or pegs or anything like that either. Right, let's try and figure this out then. One interesting thing about this is it's got external poles. I can't see that being an advantage because surely if you've got external poles they've got to be taller than the tent. It just means you're carrying more material again, but anyway. That'll be that one. I think these need to be tied together. I've got this pole. I wouldn't consider taking this hiking, that's for sure. This is an extending steel pole. I think it's from an awning or something like that. That seems to be it. That seems to be going on the lines of tension that is indicated by the webbing straps. That's the clearest picture we've got. Yeah, that one. You can see it has something in common with the picture. So I've attached these as, which is the only way they can go really, is to pull it that way. At this end we lose loads of room because the instructions are to tie those two bits together, which makes this kind of sort of sock thing at this end. Anyway, let's go inside. Yes. There's no room in here. It's the biggest shell, if you like, of all of them, and yet the smallest internal room by a long way. I can't really figure out. Now I could pitch this in a different configuration and I'm sure I could get more space out of it, but this seems to be what they were after. It's just very strange. So we've basically taken a huge flat sheet and trussed it up into a sort of peculiar box shape. I don't know. I was considering disqualifying the tent on the grounds of just the sheer weight of the thing, but now it's practicality as well. This pole has to be over 6 foot long. I mean, that's not practical. The places I want to go, I can't rely on being able to dismantle a tree for my tent poles. One thing I will do though is test the waterproofness, because we can at least do that. So it's up enough now, and like I say, I'm pretty sure this is as intended, but we shall create some rain with the lawn sprinkler and see what happens. Because of course the icing on the cake is going to be the rain just comes straight through. We shall see. I dug out this thing from the back of the garden shed, which is for watering lawns. I haven't used it for years, but I'm assuming it still works. It should be ideal for testing this out. water coming in, but not through the fabric. When I was inside here, I was getting wet, but it was because water was coming through this bit here, that's actually shown in the picture. So this is definitely part of the design. Well, there we go. The fact it's puddling up on the top here, that's got to be a good sign. And you can see on the back here, it's all beading rather than soaking in. It does, on the face of it, look like the waterproofing's been a success. I'll put the water back on in a moment. It feels slightly damp. Ever so slightly damp, but not wet at all. Yeah, I'm definitely getting wet. Well, that was jolly interesting. That's my first experience of oilcloth. Oil impregnated cotton canvas, if you like, as opposed to the wax canvas, which is what those two tents over there are. I can see it does the job if it's taunt. Where it was fairly tight, nothing was getting through. If you put your hand up to it, you could get moisture on your hand, but the only drip was where it puddled there, and after I poked it then it dripped after that. So as far as waterproof or weatherproof goes, I really like wax canvas, like the two tents on the end there. If it rains all night, it can wet through eventually, but up to that point it's pretty waterproof, and it's very windproof compared to some of the modern synthetics. The trouble, one of the downsides of something like this side nylon is it will flap about, and it's noisy. It's noisy as hell when it gets rain on it. As you probably heard when I was testing this tent, and it was raining on that one. So I'm a big fan of wax canvas. Oilcloth, it was interesting, again, that word again, but an inferior product. And I think I got it right. I think I actually got the recipe right. That was fine, but yeah, wax canvas is still where it's at for me personally. Let's come up with a verdict then. So as a learning experience on the sewing machine and learning about oilcloth, which is a centuries old thing, something I've always wanted to have a go at, that was a total success. As far as the tent goes, I'm not impressed in the slightest. I don't think it's my lack of sewing skills. I mean, I'm sure that hasn't helped, but it just seems to be the actual design. It just seems incredibly inefficient. You've got to have a massive pole and then another pole, several ropes, loads of pegs, and when you've done all that, you're left with very little interior space. And this weird gap up here, which is here. That's part of the design. Maybe it's intended more to keep the sun off you than the rain. It's been about a week since I first put this up, and I've rejigged it a bit, as you can see, and it is growing on me. I've reconfigured it to use just 2 hiking poles instead of that massive external pole that they had, and doing that has hugely increased the internal area. You've got a proper sleeping area down here, and then a kind of sit-up porch affair at this end. There's loads of room. There's actually a lot more room than you need for one person. This would be an ideal 2-person shelter now. The one thing that really lets this tent down at the moment, well, apart from its enormous weight, is this bit here. It's just this bit of webbing. It's just, and this is totally on me, it's just not sewn on right. There's no way of tensioning this bit. All the rest of the tent I can get nice and taunt, and when it's taunt it is going to be weatherproof. So to summarise once more, this is still the worst tent I own. If I was going to do this process again, I think I'd start with a really nice king-size bed sheet and just make a camping tarp out of that. So put tie-outs all the way around it, maybe put some webbing right across the centre so you can hang it. Go with that. That would be perfectly adequate for 1 person camping. This is massive. and it's massively heavy. But having set it up like this, I am starting to like it somewhat, so I will take it with me on my hike. Whether I still like it after a few miles of carrying it remains to be seen. I'm going to leave it up for another week or so, so it is almost dry now. Just the seams are, even the seams are getting there, very slightly tacky on the seams. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm going to go and get on with item number 3, and I'll see you for that. Cheers for now.